Well, hello to the family that's still left in the chat. Sorry for the late reply, but I figured I'd try a video message response, kind of like Andrew did, but I'm better at organizing my thoughts through writing, so I've kind of written stuff out here, which I'll read. So here it goes. I agree that long-form and constructive conversations are the best way to approach highly emotional topics like politics, which is why that's where I started. Over the last several years, particularly at the beginning of this year, I created several social media posts that thoroughly articulated my views and trying to engage people, family included. I didn't throw it into any particular person's face. I just made general posts hoping that people would at least notice, if not engage in conversation. Only one of those posts really garnered any kind of conversations, which I'm sure many people saw, including family, but even no family engaged in it. One of the problems there is that most people just don't like to engage. Andrew, the previous video you posted on YouTube shows that only 2 people, other than myself, from our family chat even took the time to listen to what you had to say, let alone respond to it. And one of those views could have even been you watching the video to make sure that it uploaded properly. But the more serious issue is that people don't tend to engage because they can't. They simply don't pay enough attention to what's going on to be able to engage. Before I sent out my first message to the whole family, I asked one particular person if they'd been paying attention to politics over the last several years. They gave an honest answer and just said, no, not really. If I had asked that same question to everyone individually before sending out the message, I bet that probably 2/3 of our family would have given the same response. It's very difficult for people to recognize what's happening if they choose to not pay attention. Chuck said that the Republican Party has been drifting further and further right, and I would say that it's even begun to merge with the extremist category. We've had at least one person in our family on the right, outright and unashamedly posting conspiracy theories, another one outright promoting xenophobia. These instances aren't necessarily unique. Things like that have become more prevalent in mainstream conservatism across the country, and many on the right haven't realized that, which is kind of what happens when there's just a gradual drift over time. I'll agree that when it comes to communication, overarching, that there's a difference between what is being said and how it's being said. Someone could say something that's false, but make it sound nice, and therefore people would be more willing to accept it. Or alternatively, someone could say something that's true, but say it in a way that's off-putting, and people would be less willing to accept it because they just don't want to listen in the first place. It's just an unfortunate part of our human psychology that we're wired to think emotionally, not rationally. And if someone feels attacked, then the rational part of their mind just instantly switches off and they go into fight or flight mode. Even though I've been blunt and tried to not sugarcoat anything, I've never personally attacked anyone, like calling people names or anything like that, and I haven't called out anyone specifically, like naming those I've talked to and mentioning what they've said to me. I keep it anonymous when saying those things to everybody else. The great irony in this is that even though I've been forward, people perceiving what I've said to maybe be rude or mean might make them want to run away from the conversation. Yet when actual rudeness and meanness is expressed on an exponentially greater level by Trump, it's tolerated, and that's because the hatred is not directly at his supporters. It's at other people. And people don't often understand a problem until it becomes their own problem. Not to mention that his base has something to gain politically by supporting him while ignoring who he is as a person. 1 Corinthians 13 says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth." I think that it's fairly uncontroversial that Trump is the polar opposite of every single one of those qualities, meaning that he's the polar opposite of love. That kind of makes Trump the embodiment of hatred, and embracing hatred and extremism isn't okay. The idea of thorough communication is great, and I've tried that option over and over, but it failed because no one else was willing to engage. We've gotten to the point with time constraints that there just isn't time to have big sit-down meetings with the entire family, or even have representatives from each branch hash it out and then tell their respective camps what was discussed. With early voting being just a few weeks away, we're kind of at the finish line already. The starting point for the conversation began 4 years ago, and since I've tried numerous times on a general level to engage people with in-depth conversations, but it being to no avail, really, we can't reasonably hope that people would care enough to have conversations right now. And because of that, Andrew was right in saying that my initial message wasn't intended to engage people in conversation. It was intended to draw a line in the sand. It was meant to force the issue into people's faces, which they've been trying to ignore for years. I can understand how my decision seems like it's blindsided condemnation to those who haven't been paying attention. And that kind of is the definition of blindsiding, though. It doesn't mean that it wasn't coming. It just means that people weren't paying attention to it coming. And my antics were done as a last resort option to leave people with no excuse. So they can't say, oh, I just didn't realize what I was voting for. Giving someone a fair trial is important, but they can be condemned if they ignore their trial and don't show up for it. So the core of my message is that Trump supporters are making a Faustian bargain, that being trading something of supreme importance for a material benefit, like trading your soul for great wealth. In this case, the bargain being made is trading democracy for short-term political gain. We should continue to discuss policy differences because that's always an ongoing thing, but discussion of who Trump is as a human being and the damage that his authoritarian tendencies will cause to our country seems to be a shut case. So far, no one in our family has disputed that Trump is a fascist. There just seems to be anger about what that would imply for their personal beliefs if they support a fascist. And right now, like I said, many people are unfortunately just kind of being forced into a position where they have to support one. So that's just the gist of what this is all about. Anyone who has any other thoughts, just feel free to respond.